我爱台湾
Lang Lai Jay.
What does it mean to be a global citizen? Does it take a lot of money to become one? And do you have to already know how to speak different languages? Well, I've got just the right person to chat with us today about all these different questions. Let's welcome Claire to our show. Hi, Claire.
Hi.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Claire. I'm from Europe. I love traveling. I love learning languages, getting to know foreign cultures, and being challenged. And I guess most importantly, enjoying life. And I find that Taiwan is a wonderful place to be doing all of these. And so that's why I'm here.
That's awesome. I can just tell from my pre-interview chats with Claire that she loves to travel and experience different cultures. Can you tell us where you have traveled to and also lived in the past?
Sure. So I have lived, I think, in 11 or 12 countries.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the Czech Republic, but then the first time I moved abroad to do a study abroad program was when I was 16, and I moved to France. And then I moved to Germany 1 year afterwards for half a year. Basically, for the past 10 years since university, I haven't lived in my native Czech Republic. So apart from France, Germany, I lived in the UK, in China, now in Taiwan, in Switzerland, Portugal, and I also worked temporarily in Spain, Italy, and Greece. Yeah.
You know, when you move to France, you move to UK, is it because of a job or like is it just because you wanted to?
So oftentimes when I move to a new country, everybody's like, oh, like to do what? And I'm like, to do nothing, just to be. Like, I just want to be there. And so that has become more and more the case. And for me, like if I move to a new place, it's because I want to go to a new place. It's not like, oh, there is this job, so I have to move to country X.
Yeah.
Like, no. For me, I do things because I want to do them. And so, yeah, like there was always like a study program or something to do for me in the past, just because, you know, it makes things easier to like get some help organizing your stay. And in Europe, like we don't need visas, but you know, if you, for example, when I was moving to Taiwan, I can't just pack my bag and come to Taiwan because I need a legitimate reason to get a visa. And so when I was younger, I was moving around for studies. So I did my university in Germany, France, and the UK. And then in the summers, for example, I really wanted to travel and experience different cultures. So I always found new opportunities. For example, I became an au pair. So you go and move to a foreign country and live with a foreign family for free. So you get to experience the culture and travel around. And it's extremely cost efficient and pretty much anybody can do it. So there's a lot of things that one can do if you want to get outside of your comfort zone and experience new things. So there's always plenty of ways. Yeah. And then of course I also did a lot of traveling just for fun. So outside of Europe and China, obviously where I lived for a while and traveled around. I also visited a few countries in East Asia, a little bit around the US, Canada, and I guess a bit more extraordinary is Jordan.
Interesting.
Where I went twice. Yeah.
What was in Jordan? Just because you also wanted to go visit?
I met a friend. So on one of my experiences abroad, I was at a youth exchange in Germany, and there were young people from all around the world, and I made a friend from Jordan.
That's awesome.
And I was learning Arabic at that time.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, well, you know, that would be the perfect opportunity to go and visit an exotic country and practice my Arabic, even though I knew so little Arabic and I didn't get to practice very much. But And so I visited, and it was a huge cultural shock the first time I went. And then I ended up going again maybe 3 years after that, and I stayed a bit longer, and it was amazing because it's quite off the beaten track.
Right.
So it's not a country that a lot of tourists choose to go to, and so it's a bit more difficult to get around. I was extremely lucky because I was with a local, who had a car and who speaks the language and knows his way around, so that was extremely helpful. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I love that even though it was a cultural shock for you the first time around, you still gave it a second chance and visited again. And that's awesome. Was the culture shock a little bit easier to take the second time around?
Yeah, I think definitely like the more I travel and the more I experience different countries and cultures, the more I become at ease with the cultural shock. So the first time I ever moved abroad, I moved to France when I was 16, and it was a cultural shock, right? Like the first time we're ever faced with a different culture, I think for everybody necessarily they're going to experience a culture shock.
Right.
But now if I go to a different European country that I've never been to, I will hardly experience a cultural shock just because I feel now that European cultures are so similar. And that was also the reason why I moved to China a few years back. I just realized like, wow, I used to think I was so international, but no, I'm not. Like, I'm European at best. And I figured that like, even though I was moving to a new European country at that time, I was like, okay, like it's different and some things are like I'm not used to at all and I need to get used to, but it's not really like a shock because it's just at some point it just gets very similar and you become sort of comfortable in the unknown and sort of outside of your comfort zone. And so it's like, what would it feel like to experience something truly different? And so when I went to Jordan for the second time, I had experienced living in China for 12 months. So I would say that, you know, that really contributed to like having experience with that level of dissimilarity and differences in cultures and viewpoints and habits. Like I think the 2 times in my life that I had experienced the biggest cultural shock was when I was staying with a local friend. And somehow it was very different. Obviously, when you travel to a country as a tourist, like barely sort of make contact with the culture. So you don't really experience that. But if you move there, it's different. So I was moving to these countries, but I was still sort of my own independent person. And I had friends who were also expatriates. And you still have that sort of liberty to be your own person sort of outside of the culture. And you're sort of like standing on the side and you're like sort of judging or like,
true.
not necessarily in a negative way, but oftentimes in a negative way, right? You're like comparing, you're like,
Totally.
This is weird, this is different, like, and you know you're not a part of it and you don't have to be a part of it, so you can sort of just take your distance and be like, I don't know about this, like this is different, like that's not how I do it, and I'm not going to participate in this, I'm just going to observe. But then when you're staying with a local friend, and especially if you're staying with their family, all of a sudden like you're just really immersed in this culture, and especially if it's a very like hospitable culture where like, you know, the family sort of just adopts you and they really try to care for you, and it's nice. But when you're not used to it and you're kind of like, wait a second, like you're not my mom, like why are you telling me what to do? And it can be very, I guess, conflicting. Like you're super grateful, but you're also sort of like, I don't know what's going on. And even your friend, so when you have a friend who you have known for a long time, but you have known them outside of their family or maybe even outside of their country. So the first time I met my friend, it was in Europe, and we were sort of just like hanging out with all the other people and just sort of joking around about, you know, many things as young people do. And then you meet this person in a completely different cultural setting where they're like surrounded by their family who might be a little bit more traditional. And I was sort of like, wow, like, is that the same person? Like somehow it just felt very different. And for my brain, it was just sort of like, wait, is this the same person that I was, you know, friends with before? And now he feels very different. And like there is this cultural difference and like these values that perhaps, you know, or like these habits or views that we don't share. And I didn't realize that before. And all of a sudden, like I'm feeling this sort of rift and I don't know how to communicate about it. And I feel like I'm crazy, right? Because all of a sudden, like I'm the odd one out.
Yeah.
There's just so much going on in your brain, like the human brain just tries to process everything. And it's just like I can't grasp onto anything. Like everything's different. I have nobody to talk to because the locals don't understand what I'm experiencing. And if I say something, they might even get insulted. So a very, very interesting experience. Yeah.
It's like, you know, sometimes people move to a different place to be able to become the person that they're not allowed to become. It's kind of interesting. I love how you're giving that different perspective now that that person has gone back to their own cultural environment and you sort of have to adjust But I know you did mention that you were in China. What were you in China for?
So the first time I went to China was right after my undergraduate degree. So at that time, I was living in the UK, and I just had this realization like, wow, I used to think I was so international, but actually I'm not at all. Like I was in the UK and I was faced all of a sudden with all these like non-Europeans, like a lot of Chinese people and students from all over the world. And before that, I was mainly just encountering other Europeans. And I was like, okay, if I want to know what it's like to be an international person or a global citizen, like I need to go and really experience cultures outside of Europe. And then I was just presented with an opportunity to go to China, and that was a place I never thought about. And I love learning languages, but Chinese was one language I never planned to learn. I was like, it's so difficult. Like, I don't even believe it's possible for, you know, a Westerner to learn Chinese. I wouldn't even attempt. Like, that just sounds crazy to me. And so then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go to China. Exactly because that's one place I never envisaged going to in a language I never planned to learn. So like, that's what I'm gonna do, because why not, right? And so I ended up finding a program, kind of like an au pair cultural exchange program, but it wasn't great. So I feel like in China, people don't really have an understanding of what the au pair framework is.
Very different from the European idea of pair, I think.
Yeah, so it wasn't very comfortable. I would say that the family sort of viewed me like something between a servant and a private teacher. So it was kind of in between, but like they didn't really share their culture with me. Like they didn't really cook me food, you know, they didn't take me anywhere. Like they gave me my space, but it was just, you know, I was like hoping to experience the culture and taste the food, and I wasn't really getting that. So when I was there, I was kind of bored and just sort of displaced, and I didn't get a lot of opportunities to meet people at the beginning. So that was the first time I was in China, and I spent 12 months.
Wow.
And then at the beginning, you know, I was finding it very hard. The cultural shock was just too huge, and especially when I didn't really have friends and I didn't speak a word of Chinese. And I was like going around and like trying to order food, and like I was just like pointing at things, and they would bring me something, and I was like, that's totally not what I expected. But I was like, well, you know, just roll with it. So I would just like put a smile on and be like, yeah, that's totally what I wanted for sure. And like eating boiling soup when it was like 40 Celsius, 100 Fahrenheit outside, and I was just like, oh my god. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. But yes, I was like, I'm not sure if I could ever like this country, and I was just very conflicted about that. I was like, I never wanted to be that foreigner, you know, who comes to a totally different culture, and then they're kind of like, I'm not sure I like this place. But then against all the odds, I just fell in love with China like madly and inexplicably. And by the time I was supposed to leave, it really broke my heart. It was like, I'm not done with this place. Like I love being here. I enjoy it so much. But anyway, I was going back to Europe, and I started a master's in Paris, and I realized I hated that. Like I hated Paris. I hated the school.
What were you studying for the master's?
I was doing law, economic law, which is just also something that does not correspond me very well. And I was like, okay, like I'm going back to Beijing. And so I dropped out of law school, left Paris, and I ended up moving back to Beijing, and I started a master's degree there in international relations and Chinese foreign policy. And it was supposed to be 2 years. And sadly, after my first semester in January 2020, I packed a little carry-on bag and I went for a short holiday trekking in the jungles of Indonesia. And as I was trekking in the jungles, COVID-19 happened.
Oh no.
So since then, I was never able to go back to China. I was basically locked out with all my belongings, being stuck in China. All of my clothes, my ID, my iPad, like everything, right? But yeah, so I finally reunited with my belongings after more than 2 years, a few months back.
Oh my lord.
Yeah, so that's been a ride.
Wait, so what did you do when you came out of the jungle in Indonesia? Obviously, you couldn't go back to China. Where did you go?
So first I thought it was just gonna go on for a few weeks, right? Or like maybe a month.
Right.
So I was like, oh.
That's what everybody thought, right?
Right, yeah. It was very interesting because I was still in Indonesia, and then my family thought it was the end of the world. Like, don't go back to China, come back to Europe. And all my friends were like, Claire, you're the only person who knows things about China. Can you tell us your insights? What's happening? And I was like, listen, I'm not even there. I'm on holidays. I don't check my phone. I want to enjoy myself. Like, I don't care. I'm not even going back for another like month. Like, you know, I don't know. Like, it's gonna be all fine, right? And then it was like, well, maybe not. And so I was like, okay, so I'm gonna stay close by. Like, I'm gonna go to Vietnam, stay for a month, and it's really close. And then I can go back. Then one thing led to another, and then I sort of flew across the planet. Maybe 2-3 weeks after I was back in Europe, the borders closed. COVID was catching up, and I ended up being locked down with my parents after 10 years of not living with them in their small flat in the small town where I grew up. It was nice to be back, but it was also very, very intense. Like when you're used to living by yourself and all of a sudden you're locked up in a small apartment with your parents who are also in lockdown, it was quite intense. And so after 3 months, I was like, I'm done. Like, I need to leave. And my friend was like, we're renting out these flats in the capital and in Prague. And because of COVID, we can't find any tenants. So it's free for a month. You can go and stay. And I was like, oh my God, yes, please. And she just like put me a mattress on the floor. And like brought over like a few things and it was so peaceful. I was just completely alone in this empty flat.
我爱台湾
Lang kay lai jay.
Before the break, Claire was telling us how she has now moved back in her parents' small flat due to COVID lockdown. And that's gotta be tough since the last time she stayed home with her parents for that long was before she left for college.
And so after 3 months, I was like, I'm done. Like, I need to leave. And my friend was like, we're renting out these flats in the capital and in Prague. And because of COVID, we can't find any tenants. So it's free for a month. You can go and stay. And I was like, oh my God, yes, please. And so it was completely empty. She just like put me a mattress on the floor and like brought over like a few things. And it was so peaceful. I was just completely alone in this empty flat and with all this space. It was just like, wow. Like suddenly I had so much energy. I just felt like, you know, and I had no belongings of my own. Like,
it's probably like a really sense of freedom, right?
Yes.
Because a lot of times people get tied down by personal belongings. But once you lose it all, it's like, wow, like I am free as a bird.
Yeah, it was very strange, but it was really good. I mean, especially back then, like it was still locked down. I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't need any clothes, right?
Right.
So that was very liberating, yeah. And then it felt so good. And then at the end of the month, my parents were like, okay, so when are you coming back? And I was like, I'm not coming back. And they were like, but where are you going to go? Like, you can't stay there. And I was like, I don't know, but I'm not coming back. And then I posted on Facebook. I was like, hey guys, like, I'm looking for a place to stay, like preferably in Prague, but basically anywhere. I don't care, you know, everything's online anyways. And then somebody messages me. They're like, like we have this flat and I can give you this room. And the price was incredible. Like, it was so cheap because Prague, like the rentals in Prague are really, really expensive. And I was like, okay, like it's extremely cheap, like it's extraordinary, but like I think I can do better. And so I'm like, let's see. And then the next morning, this person messages me. So we have been Facebook friends for like 8 years because we met in a conference, and I've never seen this person since then. I've never talked to him. I've never even like liked a single post on Facebook. Like we just zero contact, right? And this person messages me. He's like, hey, I've seen your post. I don't know if you remember me, but I guess it doesn't matter because travelers should help each other. So I have this flat in Prague and like I have some stuff there, but I'm basically never there. So if you need a place to stay for a few weeks, you're welcome. And then I ended up staying for the whole summer for like 3 months.
Wow.
This person was amazing. Like, you know, we had some like nice conversations, and the flat was super comfortable. And like I was like, do you want me to like pay the utilities or something? He was like, no, don't worry, it's fine. Just I'll come visit you at some point in the future when you're back in China. So I spent half a year in the Czech Republic, which is like the longest time I've been there since, you know, I left for university. And then, long story short, I got a residential position with a royal billionaire family in Italy.
What?
So it was...
How'd that happen? Oh my God.
I don't know. It's a funny story. It's one day when I was still in the first flat, I just had this thought, because like I used to be an au pair, and I know these positions exist. Like when you live with a wealthy family, you teach their kids. And so I was like, I just had this thought like cross my mind. I was like, if this situation goes on and I can't go back to China, and you know, I'm like, I don't want to commit. Like I don't want to rent an apartment. I still feel committed to China. Like all my stuff's there. You know, I still felt like I was living there, even though I wasn't. I was like, in theory, I live in China. In practice, I'm here, but I'm gonna go back. So I was like, how cool would it be if I found like one of these positions, and then, you know, I could just live with a wealthy family for free, and then like learn something from this cool family or whatever. And I just had this thought once, and I shared it with a friend, and then I never did anything about it. I never like, you know, looked for anything. I forgot about it, right? And then one day I received this newsletter email from this tutoring agency, and they're like, oh, like we're looking for a bilingual tutor who's fluent in French and English and wants to like tutor somebody in Italy. And I'm like, oh, that's something for me.
Yeah.
And so I reached out and like, I had no idea I would end up being this high net worth, partially royal billionaire family. And I was like,
wow.
But because I was hired through an agency, so my contract apparently was different from all the other staff living in their residence. And I was the only person like living in the residence who didn't have a car and who like wasn't being fed there. And you can imagine that these kind of people, they live a bit like further away from, you know, from the city center.
Yeah.
And so I kind of felt like a princess locked up in a castle up on a hill, to be honest. It was very uncomfortable. You know, I couldn't drive myself to the supermarket, and my schedule was being changed from like one day to another, and like I didn't have any stability basically, and I didn't feel very comfortable. And after 2 weeks, actually, the family themselves, they like realized it wasn't working, because they didn't really know what to expect. They were like, oh, we've never had a private tutor, like let's see how this works. It's gonna be an experiment for all of us. And then so they wanted me to like homeschool the girl, and then at the end they were like, okay, like we think it also has a social cost for the girl, so we're gonna send her back to school, and we've tried, thank you very much, like goodbye. And they basically put me on a plane back to Prague within 2 weeks. And I was like, wow. I did not expect that. And so all of a sudden I was like, from one day to another, like left without accommodation, and I was like, what the heck am I gonna do? And so I landed in Prague on a Sunday evening, and I went and like stayed with my friend who lives in a small city apartment with 2 like very, very young children. And the next day, it's my first day of class, which is being online, streamed from Beijing on Beijing time. So it's like 7 in the morning or 6 in the morning, and I'm like starting my first day of my last year of education, right? Like my suitcases all over the living room, and my friend's 1-year-old watching the screen with me, like, you know, on the floor. And I'm like, okay, so this is my life. Yeah. And that was September 2020. I was like, okay, this time I have to get a place for myself, right? Like, I can't just count on random strangers housing me for free forever. I started looking into the rental prices, and I was like, okay, this is insane. And then like the weather was starting to get cold, and the COVID cases were rising up. And so at that time, Czech Republic, the number of cases was rising. And my brother was like, yeah, I think we're gonna go into lockdown in like 3 weeks. And I was like, okay, I am out of here. I was checking the prices, and I was like, wow, like I could get an entire apartment for myself by the beach in a surf town in Portugal for the same price that I would be paying for a room in Prague. I don't need to be in a city, you know, everything I do is online anyways. Like, why would I be stuck here? And I like left within like 3 days. I'm out of here. And so then I spent 5 months living in Portugal, and after that I moved to Switzerland, where I was living in the mountains for 9 months, and then eventually I came to Taiwan.
Wow, what a whirlwind journey. I mean, to be in China right before the pandemic, which it must have been very uneasy, you know, not knowing where you are going next or where you belong, right?
Yeah, I think that's something, I mean, for somebody like me who just moves from country to country and doesn't really have a home, you always sort of have that when you feel like, I don't know where I belong. Especially, that time in my heart, I was like, I live in China, you know, like,
yeah,
I love living there. Like, I'm gonna move back. And, you know, I moved there for a minimum of 2 years, but the idea was like, I'm gonna get this master's degree in this like super prestigious university in China. So that's gonna open all of the doors for me to stay in China, have a career there, and build a life there. You know, in my mind, like I moved there with all my belongings. I thought I was gonna stay there. And so I was very, very attached to China, to my life there, to going back. And so, I mean, I got like this temporary job in Italy and all these things, but because I knew it was temporary, right? And I was like, okay, I can commit to half a year, but then I'm hopefully gonna go back to China. And so that's why it worked for me. I was like, yeah, temporary adventure, make the most out of my time in Europe, because I know as soon as the borders open, I'm out of here. Like I'm going back to Asia, and I'm not gonna be in Europe probably for a long time. And I have to say, like, it was very painful when at some point you just realize, like, months go by, year goes by, and it's just not happening, and you just don't understand, and you don't know, right? Because there's no news, and just nobody knows, and the country just really doesn't give a damn about you, right? It's like, some individuals want to come back, like, we don't care, like, that's none of our business, right? The process also of like studying online and trying to get a degree, I can't even begin to describe how frustrating that all has been, how just we were completely ignored, and not to mention I was doing a degree which was entirely in English, but just so little communication, and like all the paperwork being done in Chinese. And so I postponed my graduation because I thought I would be able to go back to China perhaps for the third year, and then little did I know that I applied for some process so that I don't have to pay more tuition fees that actually meant that I had to like sign off campus last year, even though like I wasn't graduating yet. They were like, no, you need to like cancel your student card and like get all your stuff outside of your dorm, and like we don't care how you're gonna do it, but you need to do it within like the next month. And I was like, I don't even know anybody in China anymore. Like, how do you want me to like organize for somebody to pack my belongings? Like, that's not a small favor to ask. And they were like, sorry, but do it now. And it's just like, what do you want me to do? And then this year, finally I graduated, and I'm like, okay, so like, when are we gonna have the graduation? Because I know my friends last year's, they had it at least like, you know, they could attend the ceremony online. And so I'm like, hi, like, when am I supposed to graduate? Am I done? When I submitted my thesis? And they were like, we don't know yet, but it's gonna be somebody else who's going to inform you, so like watch out for their emails, but I'm also gonna ask, and if I know anything, I'll let you know. And so I'm waiting, and then last week I open Instagram and I see like Tsinghua University graduation ceremony, and I see pictures from graduation, which was supposed to be my graduation, right? And I'm like,
my God.
Why is my university graduating and I'm still waiting for an email? So like I emailed the lady, and like she doesn't even respond to me, right? And I'm okay. And then I talked to my classmate, and he's like, oh yeah, this lady told me that apparently like the degree's already ready and we just have to pick it up. And I'm like,
what do you mean pick it up?
Like, thank you for letting me know that I graduated. Like, thank you for inviting me, like, not to mention inviting me, but at least like informing me that my graduation ceremony is taking place.
Right.
So anyway, it was a whole thing. And and I still don't have my degree because it needs to be picked up in person by somebody who lives on campus, as if I know anybody who's still in Beijing. And they're like, sorry, if it's an outsider, they can't get on campus, so it needs to be a student currently on campus. I'm like, I haven't even been to China for 2.5 years. Like, what do you want me to do? Like, I don't know anybody on campus. And they were like, sorry, like the university cannot be responsible for handling your document and like mailing it, so you need to get somebody else and have them be responsible for it. So I was like, great, so I'm gonna find a total stranger to handle all this. And like, it's been so frustrating. You can't even imagine.
I'll bet. How did you finally end up getting all your stuff from your dorm to
that was a whole other story that I could talk about for hours.
Oh my lord.
So I ended up organizing a friend who still lives in Beijing to go there. And so he was like, sure, I can go. But then they were like, oh, so he needs to be fully vaccinated, he needs to give us this and this and that, and you need to send me this document signed with the passport copies and the vaccination certificate at least this many days in advance.
Okay.
Then you have to leave campus, but you also need to apply for a permission to leave campus. I'm like, okay. And so you need to send this to me in advance, because I then need to send it to the Communist Party secretary, right? And so he needs to sign it, and he's very hard to find, so please make sure to send it in advance. And then I'm like trying to get in touch with my friend who agreed agreed to do it, but then he's like traveling and not responding, and I don't even know if he's vaccinated, and I'm just like, could you please respond to me? Like, and he's like, this is the last day you have to like take all your stuff, and otherwise you're gonna lose it. And he's still not responding, and I'm like, what am I gonna do? And then of course, like, my friend misses 2 trains on the day he's supposed to go back to Beijing, which is the last day of the month, and I'm like, no.
Oh my god.
And so anyway, somehow we make it, and then the campus is huge. It's closed, like, so it's like basically it's become a fortress, and there's 2 cases in the whole of Beijing, which is a city with 30 million people. And because there's 2 cases, obviously, like, the campus is shut down again, and everybody's freaking out and panic horror. And so I was like, I don't even know if they're gonna let you on campus, even with this piece of paper, right? And it's like, yeah, it's only for this one particular day, and he can only go on that date, otherwise it's not valid. And then no taxis are allowed to enter campus, and no kuaidis, like no deliveries, and like it's a lot of stuff, right? It was all of my stuff, so I was like, how am I ever gonna get it outside of campus?
Right.
So my friend goes and he like packs everything. He was like, listen, Claire, I'm just gonna throw all the clothes in, like with the coat hangers, like let me yes, no. And he's like, okay, this you don't need. I was like, what do you mean? He was like, Claire, it's a towel, like you don't need that, like you can buy that. I was like, okay, I guess. And so that was very helpful because they're not attached to it's like, come on, like you don't need that. And I was like, but then he was like, okay, I need to leave. You need to organize for your own delivery. And then I'm like asking the dorm staff, can you just hand it over to the delivery guy if I organize kuaidi? And they're like, no, sorry, we can't have any responsibility for any handling of your stuff. And I'm like,
wow.
Oh, so like he needs to come back tomorrow just to like hand it over to the delivery guy? Like, are you serious?
Yeah.
And then somehow I managed to find through like a group chat, there was one person who was like, I know one person who's still on campus. Like he can help you. So I'm like messaging like this total stranger, and he's like, oh, no worries, I know what to do, like I'll help you. And so this total stranger is like helping me find a delivery service, and it's like he probably called every delivery service in Beijing. It's because of COVID, all these delivery services, nobody can come in. This person I don't know at all, like now has all of my belongings, and I don't know where he is, and I don't know what's going on. Another piece of this story is that there's another complete stranger who agreed to store my stuff that I also found through another group chat. And this person's like waiting on the line, and I had no idea. And she's like, I'm sick, so I'm on medicine, and like I'm really sleepy. So do you think the delivery is coming today? Because if not, I want to go to bed. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Like this person's not responding to me. I don't know what's going on. And then she's like, okay, if the delivery comes, I'm not home tomorrow, so like it needs to come either today or like in the evening. And so this person's like, okay, like I finally organized your delivery, like it's gonna come sometime tomorrow. I'm like, oh, like the lady's not home. And he was like, okay, and then he like goes silent again for another half an hour. I'm like, what's going on? And then eventually he's like, okay, like it's on its way now. And I'm like, oh my god, are you serious? And then I'm like, did you tell the guy that like the lady doesn't speak any Chinese? And he was like, oh, oops, like so the lady didn't speak any Chinese, so she was like, I can't communicate with the driver. And then she's like, I'm on crutches, so I need the driver put them in the elevator and carry them up because I can't even lift them and put them in the elevator myself. And I'm like, oh my god, no taxi driver is gonna do that. So like she's like, yeah, you need a proper delivery. It's like you need to tell the delivery guy that A, lady doesn't speak Chinese, and B, she can't lift them. So like you need to bring it up yourself. And then he forgets, obviously, right? And so the guy comes and he's calling her, and then he just puts the suitcases on the floor and leaves. And she's like, sorry, but like the suitcases are here, I don't know what to do. Eventually like the guy comes back and pay him more money, and then he like helps.
Oh my god.
At that time, because I was, you know, in a different time zone, and like my friend was not responding, and then this whole thing was going down, so I was awake for like 30 hours straight, just like so stressed. And just that feeling when you're like completely helpless, begging complete strangers that you've never met to run around and do all these things for you. You can't do anything at all yourself. It was like you're trying to help, but there's nothing you can do, and you don't know what's going on. It was just
out of your control. Yeah,
it was very emotionally intense.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. And eventually I organized shipment from Beijing to Taiwan, and I got it like the day after my birthday. funnily.
Aww. Belated birthday present. I feel like you need to write a book for your belongings in China.
Yes.
But I mean, I think it's good to know that people are kind everywhere in the world, but it's just the system sometimes is frustrating. It's got to be frustrating for someone like you who's just trying to get through your master's program, get your belongings out, and, you know, get your degree. That's got to be so frustrating. Tell us how you came to Taiwan.
So I was desperately wanting to go back to China, right, for all this time. Meanwhile, I was like surfing in Portugal while studying online. And then after that, I went to Switzerland. I was like, oh, I haven't skied in like 10 years, so I'm going to move to the Swiss Alps and ski. And then when I'm in Switzerland, somebody I knew from Beijing messaged me and she was like, I live in Taiwan now. I'm doing my master's here and it's really nice. You should consider it.
We have not even started talking about how Claire made it to Taiwan yet. But seriously, what a story of just even how Claire finally got her belongings from China. I was serious about her writing a book for her luggage's journey. Might just be a bestseller. Please stay tuned for the rest of Claire's story next Friday. We'll finally talk about how she got here, what she is working on here, and also what are some things she loves doing right here in Taiwan. Claire 的故事很精彩吧？我们都还没有讲到她怎么来到台湾的嘞。那下礼拜请继续收听我们下礼拜的节目哦。So if you were living in Taiwan during the pandemic, you know that we had it good here since we never fully experienced complete lockdown nor the devastating deadly waves of the COVID virus during the pre-vaccine stages of the pandemic. We're now slowly coming to normalization like the rest of the world, but I think for most Taiwanese and expats alike, it's hard to fathom what you had to go through when the world was in full panic mode. So imagine if you were a foreigner living in China when the pandemic broke out and you had to rearrange your life around a giant question mark of unknowns. But since life just had a way of working itself out and somehow you end up in Taiwan of all places. Well, that's the story of our guest for our show this week. I just thought the story of how she came to Taiwan is too valuable not to share with you, since most of us have managed to live in a very sheltered environment as far as COVID goes. I definitely hope you've enjoyed our show today. We've barely scratched the surface of Claire's story as how this global citizen came to Taiwan. Stay tuned for part 2 of our chat with this special young lady, and be sure to follow her on her IG if you would like to get inspired by her fascinating life. 又到了节目的尾声，谢谢今天的来宾 Claire。我想我之所以想要把 Claire 的故事用2集节目完整呈现的方式，是因为我觉得住在台湾的我们都没有像其他世界各国的人一样真正体验到在疫苗前的疫情生活那一种情况。其实这一路下来 Claire 真的遇到蛮多的挫折，但是她都没有把它当成挫折，而且都有想办法能够解决问题，而且还让她自己获得更大的收获。很多台湾人嘛，可能会觉得说要去环游世界必须要有一大笔的钱，然后一定要把东西都规划到很周到，像是有个工作有个目标才可以真正着手去做。那我觉得当然有计划的人生是一件很好的事情，可是我觉得从 Claire 的身上我们可以学到一点不太一样的东西，就是相信你自己，只要你知道这是你由衷想要做的事情， You can make it happen. Just believe in the magic, right? 好了，今天的节目就到这里。That's all the time we have for this week. We hope that you will join us at the same time next Friday from 3:05 p.m. to 4 p.m. Till then, enjoy the rest of your day and have an awesome weekend ahead. 希望大家能够有个美好的周末。下礼拜五同一时间下午3点05分到4点，请继续收听
Friday Happy Hour in Formosa.
This is your host Beverly signing off.
再会，下礼拜见。
See you next week.